what resources should be used and how much should be paid for them, what goods should be made, and what their price should be. Although the individuals might be allowed to own some personal possessions, most kind of wealth should not be available for ownership by individuals. Just a second, just a second, just a second, just a second. Okay, guys, sorry, I stopped recording. So let's continue. Planned economy is basically where government is doing all the work. It's everything is under the government. For example, like the government makes the choices and decisions, takes decisions and makes choices regarding the resource allocations, the money values, and all that stuff. And then we go to the market economy. The market economy is where it is all on the market forces. So everything depends on the market forces of supply and demand and the workings of this price mechanism. The workings of the price mechanism. In the market economy, most wealth is owned by the individuals, with the minimum being collectively owned. So everything is privately owned. There is no such big role of government here. It's basically on the market itself. Mixed economy is basically where it's a mixture of both the government as well as the market forces. So decisions and choices are partly made by free market forces of supply and demand and partly by government decisions. Economic wealth is divided between the private sector and public sector, as I've told earlier. It's basically between in the hands of both here 50-50. In practice, all modern national economies are mixed economies. So we can note down this point over here. All modern national economies are mixed economies, although with differing proportions of free market and centrally planned decision making from one country to the next. Got it, guys? Yes. So we'll go to the third part now, that is the political systems, separation of powers. So political systems affect the legal systems. So you can just, if you really will just remember this. The reason I'm doing this highlighting is because you will you'll just remember about this whenever you think about it. Political system affect legal system. There may be a democracy or a dictatorship. There may be a democracy or a dictatorship, which generally influences the nature of the rule of law. In the nation, in democratic systems, there is usually separation of powers. There is basically separation of powers between the head of state, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. In dictatorial systems, some or all of these powers may be combined so that one person or party has total power. Has total, my God, what's wrong with this today? Has total power. We have already referred to the role of government in national economics. Governments, as we shall see, are also heavily involved in lawmaking. So governments, what's wrong with this today? Governments, as we shall see, are heavily involved in the lawmaking. Politics, the process of how nations are governed and by whom, is clearly relevant of how law is developed. Lawmaking can be a democratic process where law is developed by citizens, or a more dictatorial process where law is developed by a government put in place by another method. For example, military coup. What process is in force in a nation also what process is in force in a nation also affects by two very important factors, that is the rule of law. Just a second. The rule of law and the separation of powers. So we'll start with the rule of law first. The rule of law. So guys, actually I feel like I'm going fast. I know that, but it's not. Basically, it's my first day, so just trying to learn what to do exactly. So if any mistakes, anything, please let me know in the comments. I'll just improve myself. So nothing to hesitate, nothing. Just let me know if you don't understand anything. I'll help you. And if I don't understand anything, you can help me too. So the rule, we'll start with the rule of law. But how and what laws are made and enforced in a country depends to a large extent on the emphasis that the country's political systems places on the nature of the rule of law. This is the degree to which individual behavior is regulated by law. In dictate, dictatorial systems, there tends to be an emphasis on state or government regulations and control of resources. Control of resources. This means individual freedom is heavily subject to the rule of state-made law, and the behavior of individuals is, to a large extent, dictated by means of law. In dictatorial system, there tends to be an emphasis on state or government regulations and control of resources. Then, basically, in dictatorial system, the government has no limit. They have the freedom to do anything. I mean, individual freedom is heavily subject to rules of state-made law and behavior of individuals to a large extent, dictated by the state by means of law. Whereas in democratic, the government has limitations to their powers, and this democratic system can also be known as laissez-faire. The emphasis is on the law by being a means of sorting problems out where they arise, provided individuals act within the letter and spirit of the law. They are free to choose for themselves and how they regulate their lives and how they relate to other people and groups. Now we'll go for separation of powers. The concept of the rule of law is closely bound up with that of separation of powers. Most consensual democratic nations in the world have power held in different places so that no part of the political process holds too much influence. They usually have an elected legislature, a body which enacts, amends, and repeals laws so that people's wishes for freedom, wealth, etc. are met. Basically, elected legislature is where is a body which enacts and repels law and in the people's wishes for freedom, wealth, etc. Members of this legislature are elected by the people and represent the areas of countries in which they live. In the UK Parliament, in the UK, Parliament is the legislature and consists of the House of Lords and House of Commons. Basically, in the UK, Parliament is the legislature and consists of the House of Lords and House of Commons. Now we go for the elected executive. Elected executive or government body which makes decisions of what laws should be put into action. They make decisions of what laws should be made, what laws should be put into action, and a nation's head of state, a nation's head of the state and head of the government are the two main roles in the executive. Working for the head of the government, oftenly known as the prime minister, are normally a number of ministers of state with responsibility for various government areas such as defense, education, business, finance, and foreign regulations. The executive does not make the law. Instead, it instructs. Just focus on this words, guys. The executive does not make the law. He instructs the legislature. He just shows them or he just says them. He doesn't make the law. He's not the executive the executive does not make the law. He just instructs the legislature as to what laws should be made. He just instructs, gives suggestions, but he doesn't make them. In the UK, the executive is the political party that can command a majority of the House of Commons. In practice, the decisions of the executive are taken by Prime Minister and Ministers of State. This is also important. The decision of the executive are taken by the Prime Minister and Ministers of State, a group in the UK known as a cabinet. Judiciary. A judiciary which may or may not be elected that rules on any disputes about laws, whether between the government and the people or between individuals, that is, whether between the government is a separate part, people, that is criminal law, between individuals, that is civil law. The role of the judiciary is to interpret and apply the laws created by the legislature. Basically, this is also important. The judiciary is there to interpret and apply the laws created by legislature. In some nations, such as the US, the legislature, the executive, the judiciary are completely separate. Some nations, all these three are separate. Therefore, each is accountable to, can operate as a check and balance on the others. In most states, such as the UK, there is a complex relationship between the three sets of powers. There's a complex relationship between the three sets of powers. This means that the balance is struck between control and accountability. On the one hand, and actually getting things done on the other. That is, on the one hand, it's getting things done, and on the other, it means a balance is struck between control and accountability. In the UK, the legislature, that is a parliament, said to be is said to exercise parliamentary sovereignty. Sovereignty. This means it can make and repeal laws, as well as overrule and modify case law. That means the parliamentary sovereignty, the UK, the parliament can also make laws or repeal laws, as well as overrule the laws or modify the case law created by the judiciary. So parliament can, if it wants to, it can make laws or it repeal the laws, or else it can overrule the law or modify the case laws. However, since the UK joined the European Union, parliamentary sovereignty has been reduced. However, after the UK joined the EU, this type of thing has been reduced, as certain UK laws must comply with the EU legislation. Basically, once the EU, that is the European Union, has entered, as we say, that has entered into the chat, the parliamentary sovereignty, the parliament has lost this exercise. It cannot do it because most of the UK laws some of them has the EU legislation within them. Now, the other separation of powers that is frequently seen is where the person who is head of the executive is not the same person as head of the state. Get it? Where the head of the executive is a different person and the head of the state is a different person.